Good Friday morning, and welcome to this week's episode of Finding God in the Dark. My name is Pastor Don Stevens. John?
Pastor Jonathan Campbell. Evan can introduce himself too.
I'm Pastor Evan. I'm at St. Paul's Church in Brick. For people outside of New Jersey, that's a town in New Jersey.
Yeah, right next to Wall. It took me about 6 or 8 years living in Point Pleasant Beach to realize that with Brick Township and Wall Township were right next to it. Brick. This week, we are going to discuss the 1993 film Schindler's List. Evan had a chance to watch this for the first time in the past week or so. And this is I always get my info from Wikipedia for what it's worth. 1993 American historical drama, directed and produced by Steven Spielberg, written by Steven Zaillian, based on the 1982 novel Schindler's Ark by novelist Thomas Keneally. It stars Liam Neeson, Ralph Fiennes, Amon Gott, Ben Kingsley. And I mean, without saying too much of the plot, at least initially, it's a Holocaust movie. So let's go from there. Let's start with Evan. What do you take away from this? What are your first impressions?
Well, I didn't realize it was based on a true story.
It is based on a true
That
story.
there was an Oscar Schindler.
Yeah.
And I was. So I think that now, like, I'm so used to movies with a lot of CGI, with a lot of effects, with a lot of kind of like, I like horror movies. Like, I like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning, which is like, it's so over the top, it's almost comedic, but it's entertaining, right? Like, so that kind of violence, coupled with CGI, makes for a very different movie viewing experience. And this was like the stark brutality of the violence. I mean, when someone was shot in the head in the movie, it's very different than like when someone's shot in the head in one of the Marvel universe kind of things. I mean, this one was like, you watch it and you're like, am I watching a movie or am I watching actual footage?
Right.
You know, I mean, the contrast was so stark. I mean, it was pretty incredible. I loved watching, particularly Schindler's character, kind of developing this moral compass around the plight of the Jews, right? I mean, first he's kind of, it seems more self-serving with his business interests,
Absolutely.
but then when he sees, he's a businessman, right?
Yeah.
And he's trying to, I mean, he's empathic somewhat toward the Jews. He's playing, nice with the Nazis so he can get what he wants for his business. But when he sees the mass eradication of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto, when they shuttered that and then shipped them off, like that seems to be the turning point for him in the movie. And so I thought, I mean, it's brilliantly acted. Ray Fiennes is just like, plays a brilliant, like evil person.
Yeah.
There was a casualness to the evil, right? Which I think probably typified a lot of the Nazi soldiers. I mean, sitting just in his underwear up on the balcony, picking them off for fun, and then of course Ben Kingsley as Schindler's accountant. He was brilliant in the movie. I thought it was one of the most touching parts of the movie for me was when Schindler kind of encouraged them. In the movie, right toward the end, he's spending all his fortune to bribe people off to keep them alive.
Right.
And like he's encouraging them to worship in the warehouse. They observe Sabbath and have their rituals and their customs. So it was a really powerful movie. And then at the end, when they're putting stones on his grave, as a sign of just their love and respect for him and what he did for them. Just incredible. Yeah. It's really powerful.
Yeah, it's I think if this film doesn't move you, you don't have a heart. I mean, seriously, Just you touched on a couple of really powerful moments. I think the big powerful moment probably towards the end when they're trying to get Schindler out and away before the Nazis come and arrest him, and he's
Mhm.
realizing how much more, even though he saved almost 1,100 people from extermination, how much more he could have done. I could have sold this pin, I'd have saved one more life. The car, I could have saved 10 more people. It's just
That gets me. That scene gets me every time. I'm just like,
yes, me
oh
Yeah.
no.
too.
By the
Me
end of it.
too.
Yeah, yeah. Another scene for me that was so like just emotionally rife and heavy was when, because the women kind of accidentally end up in Auschwitz, right?
Hmm.
And they cut their hair and they hoard them in, and there's a scene earlier where they're in their bunkers and they're hearing about gassing, and they cut
Yeah,
their hair, and so they're all getting hurted and they think they know what's coming,
Right.
and then they turn the showers on and not the gas, and like the horror, and then mixed with this relief.
yeah,
I mean, it's just such it's one of those movies that the emotional gravity of it is just so multifaceted and layered, and I
Yeah.
think that scene brings that out.
yeah. To me, this is one of those movies where you're like, maybe that total depravity thing is something we should take more stock in.
That's yeah, yeah.
You know, one thing I don't know, one thing I was thinking about is that we have a tendency. I think most human beings have a tendency when we watch movies like this, we see ourselves in Schindler, and we think about how we would do it. And I remember there was I heard a story about I think it was a professor at Princeton that he was a history professor, and after he would talk about um, slavery in America with the class, he would ask the class, how many of you would be a radical abolitionist? And they would all shoot up their hand. And then he would remind them, no, you wouldn't, because the vast majority of people didn't do that. And
Yep.
Right.
and I think part of as Christians, part of what we're called to do when we see these kind of things is to not go straight to the hero role, but to actually think through, how can I avoid being the Nazi that shoots people from the balcony? How can I avoid being the businessman was helping Jews, but when it got too difficult, he stepped back? Like, how can I actually make sure I'm not the person who turns away from people when they need
Mm.
somebody?
Yeah,
That's really good, Jonathan.
I was having this very kind of conversation with folks because, how many times have you heard people say something like, well, if I was alive in 1930s Germany, I would have been against Hitler.
Yeah,
No, you'd have been the guy going, the Jews lived over there. You know
yeah,
what I mean? How many times have we said, if I was alive during Jesus' time, I would have been on Jesus' side? No, you'd have been with the Pharisees going, crucify that guy. We like to think of ourselves that, imagine myself as the hero that saved thousands of Jews. But the reality is, I probably wouldn't have been,
yeah,
Yeah.
because even today, like, what is my primary concern? Well, I'm going to protect my family.
yeah,
We have to do is look 4 years ago and see how people reacted when, well, you have to wear a mask, you have to get the vaccine. Well, do you? I mean, we found out that some of that stuff wasn't maybe as important as we thought it was, and yet there were some people who were forcing other people to do it. you
yeah.
know, and so, where are we really?
Well, how
They're
how
dead.
often? Yeah, sorry. How often do we as pastors dance around issues instead of actually confronting it? Because we
Addressing them.
don't we
Yeah.
don't want to we don't want to have a crap storm to deal with at church. I mean, I don't know about you. I've there have been times where I've danced with folks. I've ignored stuff. I had a difficult time at a church and I didn't want to go through more stuff. So there were things that I avoided, which I knew I should talk about.
Mhm.
We all have a tendency to do that.
Take
And
the smooth road, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for all of us to recognize, the people we truly admire and the people that truly make a difference in the world are the people that are willing to find the courage in those really difficult times to go, I'm not going to do what everyone else is doing. I'm going to risk my life. I'm going to risk my fortune to do what I know is right. Um, and what's powerful is he's not a paragon of virtue. I mean, he's a very flawed human being. He clearly cheats on his wife.
Yeah.
He clearly had some
Right.
really crappy business practices.
Mm-hmm.
He clearly had no problem using the war to make money, but yet there was something in him that when it turned to death and violence, he drew a line for himself, and he stayed faithful to that. And that's what's powerful about the story, and probably something we should all work to develop.
Yeah, and doesn't that, I guess, that very idea force all of us as Christians to, evaluate for ourselves, well, where is the line in me?
Mhm.
Where's the line where I'm going to say no mas, no more. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah. It's this is ultimately not the kind of film that you put on when you're having a house party, right? Hey, everybody, let's sit down and watch Schindler's List.
Right.
It's
Right.
But I
it,
mean, I don't know, it's scary to recognize, and as much as there are times where you can fairly criticize the government of Israel and you can have problems with what they do, and there
yeah,
are times which, like within any community, folks in the Jewish community can be difficult. You recognize when you watch something like this, when you really set with these kind of stories, you recognize why a lot of Jewish folks might deal with trust issues with people that aren't in the Jewish community. I mean, you
sure,
have to recognize where that pain what that pain does to people, and that's part of the conversation too. Is that I often tell people that God forgives so well because God knows everybody's backstory. And if we knew more of everyone's backstory, we would be better at forgiving.
yeah,
And I think it's important to realize that you know my sister and her family are Orthodox Jews, and I had conversations with her about her son. Her middle son has decided he wants to go to a public high school, and so they were recently having a discussion about if he should wear his kippah or not, his what's sometimes referred to as a yarmulke.
right,
And just being in the middle of that conversation and just going, why do we still have to have this conversation? Like, why do people still have this weird fear of Jews, this weird fear just of people that are different? Like, I really struggle with why we're still dealing with this stuff
mm,
after I understand it's sin. I understand that's the theological answer. But it's just, setting in that middle of that conversation, I was just like, oh my God, my nephew has to deal with worrying about having to deal with violence just because he's Jewish.
yeah,
That's
Yep.
amazingly sad.
yeah, yeah. It is, absolutely is. Um, so theologically, I mean, I read an article this week
Yeah.
because I like to do a little bit of research sometimes when I'm coming back at these films. And I read an article this week where this guy said that, a lot of Christian review websites will look at just the surface details of this film. There's violence and there's gore and there's sexuality and there's nudity. And, as a Christian, you shouldn't watch it. And I'm going to agree with the author of the article. I think you should.
Oh yeah.
I absolutely think this is a film people should watch. Is it difficult to watch? Absolutely. So was The Passion of the Christ. Difficult to watch, but I still recommend people watch it.
Do you guys remember when NBC put it on without commercials, like the year after, and they were flooded with people complaining because there was nudity?
Yeah.
I'm just like, guys, get a grip. Yes, I understand they're nude people on the screen, but that's what they went through, and it's important
Right.
for us to reflect on that. You know, the other thing that I really thought about a lot is Christians also need to set with the reality that we have helped perpetuate a lot of anti-Semitism, and
Hmm.
um, and the reality is the German church, other than folks like Bonhoeffer and Barth, the Protestant and especially the Protestant church in Germany was all in line, man. They put, they wove Nazism into their worship.
Right.
They prayed for the Führer. They lived into this, and I think that's the other thing that Christians need to be aware of is we forget that Jesus is a Jew, that everybody that wrote the New Testament pretty much was Jewish, that our faith is centered on the foundation of Judaism, and they're part of the vine we've been grafted into. And for us to hate them is for us to hate ourselves. I mean, and yet so many churches have been the fuel that drove anti-Semitism in a lot of communities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I vividly remember now. I started seminary in September of 2001. So if that doesn't ring a bell, you know,
Yeah.
but the first class I had in New Testament in seminary, um, I distinctly remember the professor saying something to the effect. I wish I could direct quote him, but I remember the gist of the statement was, um, we're going to study the New Testament. We are, this is a Christian seminary. But if as a Christian, you do not have a healthy respect for your mother faith of Judaism, you're not really working at being a Christian. And I went, okay. I mean, it was a strong statement. And it was funny because that was like Tuesday, and then it was like the next week we
Yeah.
didn't have class because of 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Wow.
yeah.
You know,
Uh
I've kind of piggybacking on what Jonathan was saying.
yeah.
Um, to me, one of and I think this is it's a larger point, but it can be explicitly theological. That it's important for us as Christians to be mindful of the stories that we tell.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm thinking of this movie, and then over through Lent. Actually, before Lent, it was back last fall and through concluding in Lent. About 12 or 13 of us were going through Bonhoeffer's Cost of Discipleship,
Yeah.
and we concluded with watching a documentary about his life. And you can't really. I'm sure it goes back even further than that, but if you understand the end of World War I and what happened to Germany, okay, completely humiliated, destroyed, boundaries were redrawn, and so they developed this story as to the who, what, when, where, how, why of
Sure.
all of that. And you know who the target was?
Yeah.
The Jews,
Right.
right? And so to me, that's just a good kind of reminder of, as Christians, what are the ramifications and the implications of the stories that we tell to make meaning of our lives and of the church, um, and to just do that with a sense of humility and to be cognizant of how are other people and other groups wrapped up in these stories that we tell. Uh, because you think, had that story been different,
Yeah.
what might have happened in Germany in the 30s
Yeah.
differently?
Yeah, or this, to me, the World War II is always a good conversation piece to talk about how violence never solves anything, because you lead into you lead into more hurt that leads to more violence, that leads to more hurt, that leads to more violence.
The vicious
And
cycle.
yeah, and that's the radical
Yeah,
idea of the cross, right? That God meets our hatred and fear with love and forgiveness and not more violence. Um,
And, Jonathan, the hero of the 20th century who epitomizes that is Desmond Tutu.
yeah,
Because when apartheid ended and those who've been subjected now become, equal partners in the government,
yeah,
instead of perpetuating a cycle of violence,
yeah,
they chose instead reconciliation.
yeah, absolutely.
But that's such a rare instance in history, right? I mean, I guess you've got Rwanda after the Tutsi genocide in '94. You've got South Africa. You have a few examples throughout history, but more often than not, it's what you're saying. It's these perpetual cycles of violence,
Yeah.
and how important it is to do what we can, I suppose, and in the stories we tell to break that.
Yeah, and how often in our history have the oppressed who overcome become the oppressors, you know?
Right. That's it.
Well, and to piggyback on your story thing, one of the powerful things that um, Spielberg does with this movie is he chooses to make the little girl's coat red, and that'd be the only thing in the entire movie, other than the candles on the Shabbat tables, uh, for them to be in color. But that coat tells a story and makes it personal, right? You can try. Our tendency when we watch a movie about horrible things is to try to get distance and to try to make it kind of out there so we don't actually have to deal with it. But his choice of making us have to follow this little girl and then to see her later dead and being, like it requires you to make the story personal. And that's probably a good lesson for us, is that if we really want to make real change, we have to choose to tell stories that are personal. We have to choose to make them about real people, not numbers and statistics. We have to make them about real human beings and the real lives they live.
Yeah, not too personal though. I found that, well, this is personal experience now. I
Yeah,
worked with a pastor at one time who always told a personal story in every sermon and started becoming the gospel of the preacher instead of the gospel of
yeah,
Jesus Christ.
yeah,
So you have to be careful with that one, I think.
Mm.
yeah. You can always go too far, but I do think it's worth us recognizing that's why change often comes when you get people to come together face to face and to have discussion and have dialogue and connect with one another.
Yeah. Yeah. It's far too easy at a distance to talk past each other, right?
Yeah,
Instead of talking to
Yeah.
each other. Yeah.
Yeah, it's huge.
Wow. Wow. And look, guys, we could go on. There's so much more to talk about with this film. We have limited time.
yeah.
So
And
we have to,
what 9 words, I think, or not?
now you're breaking up, Evan.
It, Evan or Academy, don't remember how many.
It won, if you said Academy Awards, it won Best Picture and it won Best Director.
Once it won,
Best
it won,
Adapted Screenplay.
yeah, it won 7 total Academy Awards.
Yeah. Yeah.
No acting awards, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Really, no acting award.
no
No.
acting. Three people got nominated, I want to say, but only maybe only two. I believe only Ray Fiennes and whoever who played Oscar Schindler.
Liam Neeson.
Liam
Liam
Neeson.
Neeson, yeah.
But yeah, I'm shocked that nobody won the award for acting on that,
Yeah.
because that's what really in so many ways drove the movie.
Yeah, I mean that film, had it been poorly acted, would not nearly have been as effective. I think
Yeah,
it would have just been like a bummer,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it definitely had something. Evan and I have talked about this a number of times. It definitely had something that I always connect with in a film, and that is a redemption arc, right?
yeah,
There's a character with a redemption arc. You know,
yeah,
Schindler definitely, he ain't the best guy when he starts, and he's still not the best guy when he finishes, but there's movement in that character, you know.
yeah.
Anyway, we got to talk about what's next week.
Okay.
So this was Evan's film. I picked for Evan. So now we've either got to try to challenge Jonathan to something he's never seen, which how random can we get?
I know.
Okay, you know.
All right, it's a movie I've talked to you about, Don. And I know we've been on a bit of a Coen Brothers kick. Jonathan, have you seen A Serious Man?
Yes,
Oh gosh, it's
Yeah.
gonna be hard.
but it's a very good movie.
He's not going to make it easy on us.
Jonathan, have you seen Casablanca?
Yes, I've seen all the 100 top
He
movies.
saw the
of
whole
all time.
100.
Yeah.
Like I saw 45 or something. Evan was like, I think I saw 20.
I literally did that. I've checked them all off. So
Wow.
yeah. We can do The Serious Man again. I mean I liked it. I can watch it again. That's what you want to go.
And I haven't seen it, so.
Okay. Yeah, why don't we watch it?
I would say, Jonathan, that's a deeply theological film.
Oh, it definitely is. The Coen brothers always hit theological issues. I mean,
Well,
all
you
of
have,
them.
Jonathan, you have to understand our first film, the first one we talked about was The Big Lebowski.
Okay.
And then we've also done Barton Fink, so.
Okay. Sounds good.
Evan's a big Coen Brothers fan. I'm more.
Yeah.
I've been introducing him to stuff like Akira, anime stuff.
Okay.
So,
That you'd stamp me on because I don't watch a lot of anime. So
oh, really? Okay.
that I
Now
would
we got a direction to go at least there.
there you go.
All right. So then the film we'll watch this week is A Serious Man.
Sounds good.
We will get together next week and talk about it. Anything else we've only got a couple minutes left. Anything else you fellas want to say about Schindler's List?
If you haven't watched it, please do.
Absolutely.
It's worth watching it.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
agree with that 100%. Yeah. And at this point, you almost ask the question like, how have you not seen it, Evan? But
What are you doing,
Man,
Evan? It's like you're
dude,
raising children or something.
yeah,
that's true. We'll
do.
give you that grace. He does have small children.
Yeah, like 17 of them. So it's
It only feels that way, my friend. I know I've had lots of little ones in the past. It only feels like 17.
4, 17. I mean, once you get, I think it's
Once you're outnumbered, it doesn't matter, man.
yeah, exactly. It's all exhausting. So one last thing about the film,
Sure.
which I think was just interesting, is the was it Isak? Is that the name of the accountant?
Yes.
Ben Kingsley's
Isak
character, right?
Stern.
It's interesting to me, like how his relationship with Schindler is kind of over the course of the film. At first he's just kind of like, why are you doing this? Very, very, of course, as you can imagine, very skeptical. But then as Schindler changes,
We're going to run out of time.
changes.
We're going to run out of time.
All right. Well, so I'll go with Jonathan. Watch the movie. We haven't seen it.
All right. Folks, that's all for now. Keep finding God in the dark. We will see you next week. Take care and God bless.
Okay.